Sư nhà bài chuyện à? Đi xoay. Sư ra là so chế bà là so nhà bài chuyện tung hay dùng của cái này sẽ hiện là tung hay dùng của đấy sam. Ra này sinh cái xoay về chế để cho ra sát tung này sẽ mà thế sản tiết của rồi. Ở thì đi xem là xoay chuyện tung hay dùng của đấy sam này. Xem là chế dùng hay dùng cái con này mấy cái chủ đề bạc. Nếu so cho bà là so bà, xin bà tung là so bà chính là chỉ kéo ở trung quốc ra. Thabkhe le tene ne kyo shima sadami ko ba thoba shore sungara kanshi thamne kanda ke koye dewa ro ba tharba da koye tungile tharba marwa sadami to so kwa ba se ja koye dewa to de ni ba se kanshi thamne kanda koye dewa cham rani to de ni se ba ki u tene thamar se so de tangbo nga do che che de yo chima samlo tang do Sindi chikbul samtangi omara, sindi kyo nga malaya sana milikin tanda yabushadi wara. Tindi, kyo shima dita yabushil keku yordo. Nesu sunu maji bichi ladan miliki. Tiki sudani ladan milikin li yayangya, jimbatan chudunda sebala sobu komne kondu yandre ro yora. Timene koten rudabshi kesunante yomara. Oya tichi suna.
Điền soi nẻo giác của Ngài Atessa, Ngài nói những người nào mà chỉ dùng mọi phương pháp.
So here, as Atisha has said in his lamp for the path, so here, the first level of this kind of practice is that at the beginning, whatever kind of being, he says here, strives by whatever method to gain happiness of samsara for their own sort of aim alone. This is the lowest type of being. So a being of this lowest capacity has this kind of thought that they want to abandon anything that creates harm, anything that is going to result in a lower rebirth. And so therefore they are striving after their own sort of happiness within samsara. Out of the 6 types of beings, they want to be born as say rather than they want to be born as a hell being, not as a hell being or a hungry ghost or an animal. And so they make effort in this way. They strive to abandon any actions that would cause harm to others through their body, speech, and mind, and thereby are making an effort to gain such a good rebirth in the future. And so this very basic practice of abandoning harming others, we sometimes tend to see this as something that is like small, but this is not a kind of small practice. Rather, this is like when we begin, we need to learn the alphabet, right? And if we don't have a good grasp over the alphabet, our ABCs, then we can't really get to anything higher than that. And so if we're able to recognize that when we cause harm to others, this is something that causes suffering. And because others feel just like us, they have the same kind of feeling that we have, we must abandon in any way the kinds of actions of our body, speech, and mind that create harm, that create suffering for others, and in whatever way we are able, benefit others, protect their life, show generosity, and so forth. And so this type of being is merely seeking their own kind of happiness within samsara. They're not seeking liberation, but rather only seeking birth as a human or a god in order to be able to escape those kinds of lower realms. And while this is the sort of lowest level of practice, this is something where at the very least we need to think about our future lives. If we are born in the lower realms as a hell being, a hungry ghost, or an animal, there's no way we can continue to practice things like ethics and generosity and so forth. And so we need to, at the very least, make an effort to gain the causes that will lead us to be born as a human living god or a god, wherein we can continue to practice ethics and generosity and patience and so forth. So as Atisha says in his lamp for the path, this is the lowest sort of level of practice wherein one is striving for samsaric happiness, for one's own aims alone within samsara. This is the kind of lowest level of being.
Chúng ta đã tạo nên bây giờ chúng ta có được những cái điều kiện thuận lợi, gặp được pháp để tu tập. Cho nên chúng ta cần phải suy nghĩ cái kiếp sau quan trọng hơn, cho nên mình cần phải thực hành từ bỏ những cái sự tổn hại đối với tất cả chúng sinh và không làm 10 điều bất thiện, là cái điều rất là cơ bản cho những ai muốn thoát khỏi những khổ đau ở những cảnh giới thấp.
rangi nang mi di ke shishu tsigura, rangi lungba ina da, rangi tsoba ina da, gari na di ke shimba tsigi wara. Tati tsigi na digi wara tangbo. Ta ina sosu da, sosu nang mi da, sosu lungba da gari ina, di kange siya da, dewa tuwe ke chedu, shen la tsawa chani digi wamara, di pangudwa. Sosu ke shimba tsigura, sosu dewa tuwe ke shishu re, sosu kange siya ke shishu re, rāndā rāngā nāngmī tā tī tūndāli kālē kyab gu rā. Tā yinā tī tūndāli shendāli yā, rāngā tūndā tuyāli shendāli yā, nī lūngā yīsū kōne tsāwa chē, nīwa shēng gō gō tā, rā, o tīndē shēng dī mā rī sōng dā. O tī tā nī yu gu dā, tāmbū ngā rī chī shēng gā tsō yā.
Hàng sĩ phu bậc trung.
So then at the middling level, one is seeking to kind of level out these attitudes of holding an idea of self and other in order to get rid of our attachment and hatred. So at the sort of point of the middling level, one is trying to eliminate that in order to gain liberation. And when one moves on to the Bodhisattva level, it's even more than just striving to eliminate attachment and hatred. One is striving to hold others as more important than we hold ourselves. Now, normally, we hold ourselves, like right now, where we are at, we hold ourselves as more important. We hold our family, our country, and so forth. And at the beginning, while we are still sort of beginning practitioners, that's okay. But in order to alleviate our sufferings, whether it's of our family, our community, our country, and so forth, in order to alleviate our sufferings and accomplish our happiness, we should never seek to harm others.
다들 침바 동안에 시행도와 되게 깨웠지만 소소 세계 내면에 소바다 가리네 대주 매풍바 풍바 매고 좁으면 이게 저 진짜 강의 중에는 대장장 갈래 취시다 섬로 고토 말와 무기를 세지 사회에 통해면 대장장 섬마도 그 섬로 고토 말와 진짜 매회 제도에 진이 침바 당고도 와 침바들 망부도 와 상승기 침바샤로 와 전에 알이야 강에 여부터 세로시야다 최기 침보다 마무도와 어디 롱주 침보 롱주기 풍부한 매고 야부용에 전달이야 단도서서 침보다이나티 제부텔레테니 치수는 롱주 침보 연구를 거라 되네 겨치마 계산사에 좀 많지 봐 야부용에다 아니 겨치마 수제바서 그러와 수이도 와서 그러와 지 통하다가 뒷바람에 소시에 공개된데 심제도가 어떤데 많이 계시 통되어 본다고 그러와 미희동아 상매 바통도 나와 미디 삼사 도자매 용게 통되어 보시 어떤데 계열이야 아니 서바 공고도 와 진배롱주 침기때 세변 당대에서 기부 중국에 교시만 남이든데 용에 단달이야 다시 지거라 잔주 선발전에 그 치마다 랑이 단다 살마다시 셴변 버시 삼을 당도 와
So here, then in order to practice, in order to gain a good rebirth in the future, we need to, at the minimum, practice the kind of ethical conduct of abandoning the 10 non-virtues of body, speech, and mind. And by holding to this kind of ethical conduct, then we are able to gain a good rebirth in the future. So it is through that kind of ethical conduct that we are able then to have a good rebirth as a human or a god. And it is through generosity then that we are able to have the kind of possessions and wealth that we need. If it is the case that we are impoverished in our future life, that we are constantly struggling to have the things that we need, then we're not able to carry out a practice of Dharma. If we're constantly struggling to survive. So here, it's important then that we should strive to practice generosity in order that we have those kinds of things in our future life. And it is through the practice of patience that we gain a good kind of form in our future. It is through the practice of patience that we gain a kind of splendor, a pleasantness, wherein others enjoy looking at us. We're sort of pleasant to behold. We don't kind of scare people off. So here, we need to be able to practice patience, the kind of patience that doesn't get angry with others, that sees their needs as important and doesn't just kind of disregard them. So patience is another important practice in terms of the kind of ripening results of in our future life, in addition to having that foundation of ethical conduct and having the practice of generosity.
Chúng sinh tự nhiên người ta cảm thấy rất là sợ hãi, tại vì họ không có hành cái hạnh nhẫn nhục. Trên bố thí thì được giàu có, trì giới thì được sinh vào cõi lành, và nhẫn nhục thì được thân tướng xinh đẹp. Cho nên một vị mà Bồ Tát thì nên suy nghĩ làm lợi ích thế nào để cho lợi ích cho người khác là quan trọng hơn, chứ không bao giờ nghĩ đến cái lợi ích cho bản thân mình. Nên phải thực hành bố thí, trì giới, nhẫn nhục.
Samlu sem tempo tende yungredo. Kasakala sem yungdoge. Si tenda si kan samlu tani yungu temme doge. Tende meya chedo tingi chokongena. Sendila sem terdoge. Kewachima sem tempo yungade tende chula dogedo. Samden ki shiyese. Samden ki sem nambari yungade. Kasakala yungdoge. Tende sem dipa. Mayenge so sam kashe tende yungdo. Samlu tempo reta chi kan tamado. Kashipe thank you sabra chishibden de gudo o tende me keban dura samden ki shi lo cheshara ni shirable changoro do namju shirable chakaje changbo ne chendele chakaje changbo ne ti chegi shirab chiru do do semgeden do palcha shagora nga dunyam do gede semdera semde do semge ya ten do ke palcha shana de mege palcha shana shirole changbo simbu shebe ne ti nubade te de yore nyam do o ti sonjane ko kewachima Shirab Shabukia that take Kevadora.
So then it's important, in addition, that we practice meditative concentration or meditative stabilization, which results in having a more stable mind that is less distracted. So in order that we are able to, say, pacify our afflictions and pacify our distractions, we need to cultivate this kind of meditative stabilization. Even at the point of the being a middling capacity, one needs to train in this. And that kind of training in meditative concentration will lead to a kind of pacification of the mind, and that will leave imprints in future lives as well. We'll see the sort of the foundations of that we have developed in this life in those future lives. And so this again is something where when we develop it in this life, we are going to see the results in the future. So in addition, we should be training in our wisdom. This is something where as much as we develop so much as we
Nên là
develop
việc
our
cũng như vậy, trí
wisdom,
tuệ chúng ta sẽ
it
được
is going
phát
to
triển.
lead to our increased development over time.
koya nösira jiden kamdo koya nösira ra koya lüse koya lonje saya tunese koya lonje sete do o tidu da koya tendo tawache gudu samkare ju yude ko judi mebe sona taya yorwa kanga ju mebe yona yomare nangbeluya judan kenjile tene ko debuti yongora sati judi pa mebe sona ni ti ko mebe chagira koya dele ju yore ese koya judi pa mebe so shagina ni ko le tarwa toya yore sungora semde nyamo le targo da to le semde chagda nga samsang ganji mebe se ne nga ye samsa chagba mena tawa yongu marwa chagda ge nyamo se sona ene ko kyo le yo mare ko kyo le bala keba se bada kuba le ba se ni ge le so ta burwa se ba mena ti che yo mare le yo na ko kyo le yo mare ngara jo dure chi yo na ko sen yo na ya tele chuda tinde mena kambu se tene ke yo mara tine she se ba de mena chagba shenja de mena se ba mena ni le so ta chune chenpo suni mi chunga de rebu ke chuga de omaro o ti ndu chakpa pangore ta tunda tangjin kan samsa nga de shenja chenpo se sa chenpo shu chigdwa o ti dani nga ye se nga zu konzo se chakdang se ngobo le chakdang rup se shenja shuk chenpo shdwa o ti meba cha suna tarwa tobu yore koye kyewa ranga ranga meba che kiji che yo mare tini lui laya yo de lui de sosu yilu singa de langare sosu samba na shi che kadu dorna tongde kadu shana shange pata di miso de jiye na sosu le ranga yo tenga tindre shi lingirwa yiji rang shi ji lui korangi samlu na kandra shi lui kandra jingu samla tindre jinga yungu ra o ti kibun jingi shi ra o ti samlu kibu ra tili chakdanda di pangkudwa nyomo kongdo nga je chato sero napsim nese sero nyomo be rito ini nga samsa shuk chimbo shibu jingidwa changme sene kei chishu yinba nge tanda liya tanda chukuni shandal neba chene chogiri oyogiri samsa rizidwa o di samlu te mena tila ta tongba nye sere tanga se tuzu yungidwa kibu jingi samluwa ta kibu chimbo tila ya ne tondro sona o ta ranchi bu koya se di kiwa tongma meba ne tanda bodo kote yora samsal miliki lale kita tus korte tanda tambe tus te inata pe tubude shasa ngone samtane sem kyoya rijora tandul kene kaze kaze se to kande chevishi miliki ni shini pumbu to kande chevishi ro okay thoma me bane tanda badore tanda ma bandus te jina sem kyora oti de ta tezo me ba sogodo samde rajibu koya dongele thane disa mare samche de phamma ga chebe tezu kyonga mare changma chigi chele del dangene shejiro 기시페는 거 마셔봐 마도 저 다와 맹게시 오 말해 어 뒤치리 이번에 아니 삼루 신다 단데 소소 때원들 동에 med도 버래 티나시 미 신다 심제 강가 때원들 동에 med도 버래 콘주 동에 댕에 세로 제고래 더 두로 제고래 근데 네버 연계게 간사 상계 생게 고반 통 네버 연계 증가 차고래 삼 심제 탐제 더 두베시도 상계 고반 통되게 셈께서는 기부 챔비어 셈세고도 어 되게 방한제 기부 충을 놓자 기부 등을 놓자 기부 챔비어 놓자네 상계지 고반 토바차기 대체도 된대 교시 기부 충우다 등대 챔비어 남도서 토바체 삼바체 공바체기 삼상 꿀롱세다네 니냥고라 어디인데 당부 치어서야 가래 임바디 야봉 어쩌고 어디 야 된댔어
Tis Dạ mang cho rì sa tha.
Khi mà trong tâm thức của chúng ta đạt được
So then at the being of middling capacity, their thoughts get a little bit higher or go beyond just thinking of a good rebirth in the future, thinking about, well, it's good to escape the lower realms, but I still would be within samsara if I take rebirth as a human or a god. One is still under the control of karma and the various afflictions. And so when we think about taking taking a good rebirth as, say, a human or a god, this is something that is still subject to the lack of control, having to cast off our aggregates again and again. And so gods, for example, are not Buddhas. They are still subject to samsara. And so when it comes to what? So So here, I'm not sure if everyone hears the Tibetan as well, that there's a question asked here. So we're talking about how the fact that gods are still within samsara. They're not Buddhas. They are still subject to having to take rebirth again and again. We talk about the Buddha as being a god of God and coming as like an emanation body, but that's different than a deity or a god who is still subject to samsara, who is going to take rebirth due to their karma. So at the being of middling capacity, one thinks, I want a kind of definite happiness. When we see even a human being is subject to various kinds of suffering, of birth and aging, sickness and death, and even gods and demigods, those that don't have great suffering during their lives, they have to face a great deal of suffering at the time of death. They know that they are going to die, and then they have to face that they are going to fall into lower realms. And the beings in form and the forms and formless realms have slightly more sort of like subtle bodies than we do. And they're not subject to the kind of abject suffering, the suffering of suffering that we have as human beings. But they are still under the control of karma and the afflictions, meaning that they are going to cast off their aggregates and take up new ones due to the force of the actions that they have created in the past. They're not able to escape that kind of cycle. They have to experience the various sufferings that come with taking up those kinds of aggregates due to karma and the afflictions. No one can kind of escape the sort of sufferings that they have to experience when you have taken up in that uncontrolled way various aggregates. We have the 6 types of beings, and we kind of go from lower realms to higher realms as a human and so forth when we are born as a human being. And so we call these various things samsaric beings. And really, samsara, when we talk about the sort of places and things, it's really these appropriated aggregates, these aggregates that are taken up due to the force of karma and the afflictions that mean that we have to suffer. So when we are born as a human, we have to get old and we get sick and we experience all of these various sorts of sufferings due to having taken up these aggregates. And so this is the kind of way in which one is referred to as a samsaric being. When we talk about samsaric beings, it's like whether you're born as an animal, you experience the sufferings of an animal. Whether you're born as a human, you experience the sufferings of a human. And so here, this is really a matter of the fact that we recognize that there is a cause that leads us to then have to take up those aggregates, the appropriated aggregates. And again, when we have taken up these aggregates of feeling and form, we can take up various forms. We have the discrimination and karmic formations and so forth, and consciousness. Then one is going to continue to cycle in that kind of samsaric realm when one is still propelled by that. But if you can identify this kind of cause, then you're able to get rid of the results that come from that. And so one recognizes that it is this kind of our karma and afflictions, and in particular the kind of afflictions of attachment and hatred, the grasping at a self and the attachment and hatred that come from that. One recognizes that that's, if one is able to get rid of that kind of those causes, those afflictions, and as well as the sort of conditions that give rise to their ripening, then one can eliminate this cycle of taking rebirth. And so again, when if we have like say for example a seed, that that seed may have the ability to give life, but if we don't give it the proper sorts of conditions, then it can't ripen. So in the same way, when it comes to the cycle of taking rebirth, if we get rid of that kind of craving that ripens those karmic seeds, if we have eliminated that kind of sort of ripening factor, then we are able to get out of this cycle. So again, if we eliminate the kinds of causes and conditions that lead to our repeated rebirth within samsara, then we're able to get out of this cycle. And so it is based on this recognition of when we have these ideas of self and other, the attachment and hatred and so forth, we get caught up in creating karma, and those karma and afflictions will in turn drive us in this cycle of rebirth, in this cycle of taking up the appropriated aggregates again and again. And at the being of middling capacity, you're looking to get rid of that, get to a definite state of happiness, achieve a kind of a mental body wherein one is no longer subject to that same kind of cycle of rebirth. So here again, the kind of being a middling capacity is recognizing the causes that lead to this repeated rebirth within samsara that is propelled by karma and the afflictions and the resultant suffering that comes from that. And so this is what they are striving to get out of. And then when one comes to the kind of being of great capacity, moving beyond that level of thinking just about one's own aim, one's own liberation from samsara, then one gets to thinking about other sentient beings, that striving after just one's own liberation would not be right. But rather, we see that all other sentient beings are just like us. And not only are they just like us and having the experience of suffering and wanting to have happiness, but they have shown us great kindness. And so we give rise to this desire to attain a state, to the state of Buddhahood, wherein we are able to fully benefit other sentient beings, wherein we have eliminated all faults and developed all good qualities, and thereby are truly able to be of benefit of others. And so we should think that in order to be able to attain this state of Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings, I am going to listen to these teachings. And so this is, whatever we are undertaking, we should set that kind of intention. And when it comes to these levels of motivation, this is something that is built up in stages. So we begin by reflecting on our future lives, and then our own definite happiness, and then Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. And with that kind of motivation, we undertake listening to the teachings. And again, listening is not sufficient. We have to then engage in contemplating the various teachings, and contemplating then leads us into meditation. So with that sort of recognition, we should set our motivation for listening to the teachings.
Cũng như vậy, nếu như chúng ta đoạn trừ được cái lòng ái dục thì chúng ta không có thủ, chấp thủ, và không có hữu. Hữu là mình hiện hữu và sinh ra. Cho nên vì có ái, có thủ, có hữu, nên chúng ta tái sinh và bị sinh tử luân hồi. Do cái lòng tham trước là chúng ta và họ, rồi là chúng ta bị tham trước, rồi chúng ta sẽ gây ra rất nhiều cái nghiệp bất thiện từ do ái và thủ hữu, do phiền não. Khi mà chúng ta đoạn trừ được cái tham trước, đoạn trừ được ái dục, thì chúng ta vẫn có cái thân. Nhưng cái thân đó là ý sanh thân, có nghĩa cái thân của mình tự chọn, mình tự do để nhận cái thân và từ bỏ cái thân. Muốn sinh vào cõi nào mình sinh vào cõi đó, muốn bỏ lúc nào mình bỏ. Mình không bị trói buộc trong cái thân của vật lý, có nghĩa là gọi là ý sinh thân, tùy ý của mình mà mình chọn cái thân để tái sinh. Cho nên là đó, mình sẽ vì lý do đó, đó là một cái hạng sĩ phu bậc trung là thấy ở trong sinh tử luân hồi cứ lẫn quẩn mãi, các vị cảm thấy rất mệt mỏi và muốn thoát ly vĩnh viễn khỏi đâu trong sinh tử luân hồi. Cho nên mình đoạn trừ tham ái và thiền quán vô nghĩa để vĩnh viễn chấm dứt khỏi đâu trong sinh tử luân hồi. Vì lý do đó cho nên các vị phải loại bỏ tham, sân, si, kiêu mạn, tật đố, ghen tị, vân vân, tất cả những cái tâm tiêu cực, tâm niệm phiền não. Tại vì cái loại trừ chấp nhẹ nữa. Tại vì chúng ta chấp nhẹ rất là nặng nề, lúc nào cũng xem mình quan trọng nhất, đụng tới là mình sẽ nổi sân, nổi tham, nổi si và kiêu ngạo. Nên chúng ta cần phải một cái vị hạng bậc trung, phải loại bỏ hết tất cả tham sân si và phải chứng đắc được vô ngã. Tại vì các vị suy nghĩ rằng dù mình có sinh vào loài trời loài người thì cũng sẽ bị những khổ đau của cõi trời của người. Loài vật thì bị người ta chém giết, người ta ăn thịt. Rồi loài người thì cũng trải qua tất cả những khổ đau mình đang trải qua, già bệnh chết và những cái điều mà nó cứ sôi sục trong tâm can của mình. Nên từ vô thủy cho tới ngày hôm nay mình bị khổ mãi trong luân hồi. Các khi trải qua cái khổ của loài vật, khi khổ đau của cõi ngạ quỷ, khổ đau của địa ngục. Bây giờ chúng ta đang trải qua khổ đau của cõi người, hoặc trải qua cái khổ đau của cõi trời. Nên từ vô thủy cho đến nay, và nếu như chúng ta không chấm dứt luân hồi thì chúng ta lại tiếp tục khổ đau những kiếp kế tiếp, vì nó bất tận. Cho nên nếu suy nghĩ như vậy, nếu chúng ta cam lòng mà để chịu khổ đau như vậy, thật là một cái điều rất là đau buồn. Nên chúng ta phải tiếp tục phải trôi lăn trong sinh tử luân hồi. Cho nên vì lý do đó, suy nghĩ như thế này, tất cả chúng sinh họ đều sinh tử luân hồi, họ đều từng là quen biết nhau, đã từng là ân nhân của mình, từng là mẹ của mình. Do chúng ta không nhận biết họ, tất cả đều muốn hạnh phúc và không muốn bị khổ đau. Nên suy nghĩ như vậy, nên chúng ta làm thế nào phát cái tâm cao hơn, cái tâm tối thượng, cái tâm vì lợi ích tất cả chúng sinh. Cho nên chúng ta phát lên cái động cơ là muốn lợi ích cho tất cả chúng sinh. Nên con sẽ thực hành tất cả các pháp hạng sĩ phu bậc tiểu, hạng sĩ phu bậc trung và hạng sĩ phu bậc thượng, là chúng ta tu tập tất cả pháp. Có nghĩa là mình phải tu tập tất cả pháp từ bậc tiểu, bậc trung, bậc thượng. Chúng ta phải tu tập hết vì lợi ích cho tất cả chúng sinh. Cho nên con học pháp và nghe pháp. Mà muốn học pháp và nghe pháp, thực hành pháp thì chúng ta cần phải hiểu pháp là gì. Cho nên với động cơ đó chúng ta lắng nghe giáo pháp.
이거 토연님이 있어더라. 무슨도 토연님이 가르치나. 공주 소소 류다 semete 와체 아니 류메데 와체 니마고라 소바 그만 보여도 와 라미기 버스 셈메체 아니 자실라 소바 테주 아니 미기 버스라 자기서 라는 자부 연계도 참부 연계도 마찬 버스라 진짜 그냥 연구를 해야 돼. 지소소아 이 땅아 좀 무슨도 통하게 님이들 아콘도 되냐 뒤진도 소한테 가르도 소스나 자시소 좀 배니 버스리다 란 미기 버스 통해 무슨도 통해 콘도 님이들이야 소스 미기 버스 셈바 미기 버스 아니 소보메 대와시 아니 님하고 소보 전셔만 보여라 감보다 야고 싶으나 대비나 고kim나 소고 말해 남규스 코란테사 빨리 링거도 쉬우시 텐도나 기부서그 말해 semba trude요나 그 semba랑 신도 매버시 trude요도 내가 semba tru 대왕그 류메대와 샤야다 아니 니냐나 니메고라서 달게만 뭐 나주 하고라 kontu님이 무슨 통교라 디나신 남미미도 버서야다 angare to부여도 마셔 버서야다 미강가가 오다 텐텐시마도 파약 붙였나 이 콘도 잡으시지 왔다 님이 자르셔 그랬다 마찬 버차그다 시기도 제선 코텐트 님이도 무슨도 통해 예배님이라 다 통해 매배님이 따르셔서 콘도 계속 좀 그랬을라서 봐는 여기다 던르기 알서 봐 어디 주소냐.
Chúng ta đã học tới cái nguy hiểm.
So, picking up where we had left off in the text, here we were going through the kind of visible defects, the defects or the faults of anger that we are able to see. And so we had left off at a point of how it destroys our relationships with friends and relatives. And some of the earlier verses described how when we are angry, anger makes us unhappy mentally and can create physical suffering. And it also makes it so we like can't sleep. When we have a disturbed mind, we're not able to enjoy the things that we would normally enjoy, like going to a park or somewhere pleasant. When our mind is disturbed by anger, we're unable to be happy with those things or enjoy those things. And so this can also, anger creates discord with our family and friends. If we are a really angry person, even if we say show others kindness or generosity and so forth, they're always going to be wary of our potential anger. So these are the kinds of defects that we can see, let alone those sorts of defects that we can't see, things like destroying the roots of our virtue and potentially creating problems in our future lives, kind of destroying those positive actions that we have accumulated. Here, we're getting into the kinds of defects of anger that we are able to witness for ourselves.
Đó là những cái nguy hiểm mà chúng ta có thể thấy được do giận dữ gây ra.
Ôi à, thế nên con đôi những mình tuyên niệm bác sĩ trên đó sao? Đó nó có vẻ tên này bác sĩ. Tuyên niệm bên nó có cả số con đôi sẽ số nó. Đó điều sáng nó số tiêu mà kêu số đấy sẽ ra. Tiêu hay mà đấy sẽ. Nên thôi tại tiêu là thôi thì số trang này sẽ đấy sẽ. Ra là nếu bác sĩ cái tu sĩ đấy sẽ ra. Sen tiêu là nếu bác sĩ cái kêu chỉ mà thì bác sĩ nghe số đó là số vậy nếu bác sĩ vào đó. Sonda con dortuna toya trai teleso 동해단이 제발 좀 스티레도 근데 세배 팽이 지셔서 세배 팽이 강시 좀 뒤쳐 좀 봤더니 대단 시한도 됐어 सबसे 이제 깔래 잡고로 맞은 나물로 행기 나라도 콘도 세쳐져서 콘도 마셔나 만지 버스를 삼을 코르기도 하고 지랍선 남산팔 지랍 그런 마도 만쳤음 콘도 사고 삼고도 아주 콘도 봐 잠에 탑시 채고요도 강시 좀 뒤쳐 좀 봐. tos kale kyapche sabso cheche kondu pan jomne soba ko tapsi chegure sora o tinde chebene ne soba yabu komtone sendila ran tewa nammi tewa randanyamdo yunge tsu tewa chima sadami ko ban towa de lamno garwa o ta o de chusha tiboton dosa.
So last time we had also gone through this verse that describes, sort of summarizes the defects of anger. It says in the second half of verse 5, in brief, there is nobody who lives happily with anger. So that sort of summarizes how much it creates a problem. And then it continues by saying in verse 6, hence the enemy, anger, creates sufferings such as these. So anger is like our enemy. It will cause us suffering in this life, as well as causing us to be born in the lower realms, and so forth. This is something that we should regard as our real enemy. And then it continues with the second half of verse 6 that describes the benefits of patience. And so it says, but whoever assiduously overcomes it finds happiness now and hereafter. So if we are careful, if we actually watch our mind, because our innate mind, we're sort of always ready, right on the edge of getting angry. We have that innate kind of natural ability to get angry quite easily. So we need to use methods. We need to be assiduous in our application of methods to destroy, to eliminate our anger. And if we are able to do that by practicing patience, by developing this kind of patience, this will create happiness in this life in terms of the kind of harmony that we have with our family and friends, as well as benefits in our future lives. So whoever assiduously overcomes our anger, finds happiness now and hereafter.
Kondo meyon soala kondo gyudi mebe soko yora. Tienda kondo gyudi kagu yora. Any kondo gyudi kaso any seba komto ne pende de yora shegdwa. Tienda ko ta kondo gyu kagu delia. Tanzen da bishi ko ne kagdwa. Kondo gyudi mebe soko stela tanzen shi. Je ma mebe soko yora. Ta tanzen tangbo de ne pa je ma iba so bachi le ngora. Ta tanzen tangbo de wa. Tangbo de kare sana. 그 뭐다 님이 다시 해봤어요. 당부 그 뭐 님이 다시 해봤어. 콘드 가르세네 콘드 규디 뭐 생각으로 뭐 되는 생각으로 콘드 세ten 델세가 콘드 규디 디레 생각하지. 와. 근데 콘드 규이 뭐지? 다들 좀 마셔도 야디 말아서. 당부들아 그 뭐다 님 콘드 규디 뭐서 근데 뒤견견시도 콘드 규디 껴래. 다단다 가지고 콘드 규디 뭐서 그거다. 규디 매버서는 콘드 매버서 돌아. 콘드 규디 컨디션 거래서나 맨들 제단 더바에 객제 벌레 총교르바 이미 대회 세년에 시단때 단좀 소세더라. 가수로서는 맨들 제단한테 현다지 소수 더바 맹게지 제소나 아니 콘드사교라. 현다지 소수 더바 맹게지 제나 되고요 말에 소수 더바 내시지 고요라. 라와 침부체 소미가 그 소수 더바 내시고 말아 이나코 맨 더바 내시 정말 송삼지 아니 콘드사교라. 맨들 제단한테 더바에 객체 벌레 중 소수 더바들 객체소나 소수 단다 두베들 객체소나 더바 제소나 소수 단다 두베 요체 티두베로 그 객체소나 근데 저 티규지래 그기버티라 맨들 제단 더바에 객체 벌레 중교가 이미 대회 생년에서 어다 경원에 되기래 이미 대회 생년에 시다대대 다조소스 선미기바 차야 되래서 콘드규데 선미기바 이메도와 이메도와의 컨디션 연구에서나 언겐 더바나시 체마 소아섬 네들 단다 두에들 건데바 체소아섬 소소 더바다 메트 바체바다 소소르시 네바체보 tin데 삼루타제네 삼바미기오 샤그라 이메도와의 다 콘드사의 중원에들에 나라저바 또시 잔디마스는 남사 선미게 치라 선미게 전에 콘드사 쳐저다 진 남사 콘드사그라 또시 잠만들 중원에 그 선미기와 tin데 연구를 삼산한테 연구를 개요 말을 삼다 콘도사요 말아 아주 대식 말아 또선 dim마서 dim마서 자크치세 아니 콘도사라 이 메데와데 콘도게 칼라초디 인체래 이 메데에 세년에서 이 메데와지 지금 단디만데 소소 나메도 전 아니 선배미기 샤그라 선배미기 샤스나데 또 콘도야 류제게 칼라나시디레체라 이미 대회 생년에 시단대에 단주로서도 이 메도아의 중성에는 시단코야 계획 규칙으로 되게 시단대에 단주로서 전에야 콘도기를 콘도기에서 담보 소송이 기버서 대근에시 라셈밤이 기버서 리미기버서 나무미 기버서 현대자리 기버서 자리 기 타마 삼살 콘도세는 소소소소세야 미세야 강거 용도 어떻게 되자 콘도 교원에 가려서는 이 메도아들 이 메도아 선배미기 버셔야 돼. 선배미기 버셔야 주디 가르스는 소소 대바나신 마셔 받아 소소 단다르지 투엘에 계획해서는 선배미기 버셔야 와라. 어디 송도 와. 디사세 맨데 제단 대바에 계획해서 라다 랑게 대바 맹게 준비지 셔스나 근데 속바를 지내 내가 지고네 소소 지지 제고 삼들 퍼져들 때 멤버 셔스나 공도 제거라. 내 더반내시 제마서 상원에 제 소신 더반내시 가고 제거야지 와마라 삼선민 더반내시 제거를 삼선 소신 더반내시 제거마다 소소왕 제자네 내 더반내시 제방소를 건사겨라 키 더반내시 제거야지 개요마라 퍼져된 내 더반내시 제마서 수 건사나티라 대녀도 요리 파티션 맨들 제다스 더바에 계제성에 더발야 계제성에 근데 섬래가 뒤집으면 그때 매마지 계제성 내가 계속섬 등이 주제 텔레소고 다 단디만디 총소나 아니 이메데와 기르셔라 이메데와 선배미게셔서는 다데 콘도기야 주디레스 근데 다 단디만디 총소나 이메데와데 가셔서로 콘도데 매서고요나 단디만디 지리 용구라 지된 감강가 소소 데바네셔 요마라 술라 용구 말아 삼천린데 그래 삼천 마디 그래 지티 코아로 코아 인도 장고 레다 녀무베 왕글레사 셰드 삼천 야가 삼천 두가 용에 리티 단단 가서 코아게로 미수지게 내 삼번에시 코알리케네 랑 데바네시 강가도 맨도 삼 매서지 요마라 용토에 요마라 용에 거리 요마래 제 삼로 땅에 거리 요마라 땅에는 가라서 제 삼기로 이 데바네시 제고 삼제 oda derda mendo chedan doba ye kekse palese chunga yime tewe senyine shidan teze semme giba shete tandri mandi chiri yungura tidu zon suzu semme giba shesone tati kondo ki sere kala shimshudere tine ko tobya kegre ne kondo shukcheru de chera o tichi sonya zawa lobimba mendo chedan doba ye kekse pale chungurba yimi tewe senyine shidan tete tanjum soose shidan diya nuba kene 당부 소소 선배님께서 따라줘서 건드니 미셔서 단단데 소소님께서 샘님께서 대강가 연구했어요.
So here, then second, we have sort of applying our minds to the methods for accomplishing patience or forbearance. And so here we get into the various sort of topics as they come up. But the first of these is stopping the cause of anger. And so the stopping of the cause of anger itself has various sort of subtopics. And the first of those is sort of the kind of defect of the nature of anger, the nature of the cause of anger. And so here, it's important if we're going to be able to stop our anger, avert our anger, we need to recognize what is the cause of our anger. What is it that gives rise to this? So we've already discussed the faults of anger, but if we're going to eliminate it, we need to identify how it arises. What is the cause of it? So here in verse 7, it reads, having found its fuel of mental unhappiness in the prevention of what I wish for and in the doing of what I do not want, hatred increases and then destroys me. So here, the first sort of cause is when we don't get what we want. So when we have this idea of like, oh, I want this to happen, and someone acts as an obstacle to that, or there's something that prevents that from coming about, that acts as a cause of our getting angry. Or if someone does what we don't want, that is also a cause of anger. So really, this is identified here in what's the first line in this English version, having found its fuel of mental unhappiness. This sense of mental unhappiness that arises from a sense of like, oh, I didn't get what I want, or I got something that I don't want. That kind of mental unease or mental unhappiness, when something goes slightly wrong, we often give rise to the sense of like, oh, I didn't get what I want. And that kind of mental unhappiness acts as like fuel, as like food for anger. It's what anger feeds on in order to get strong within us. And so when we have that kind of mental unhappiness, we are actually giving food or giving fuel to anger. And so it is something that acts to increase this anger potentially. So if we are going to get rid of that, we need to recognize that this mental unhappiness that acts as a cause of anger. And so as the verse continues, it says, hatred increases and then destroys me. So when we don't avert this process, when we have this kind of mental unhappiness that comes from, like again, if we had a situation where something goes not how we want, we can recognize, you know what, that's how it is. Sometimes things don't go how we want and kind of let go of that. Then we don't give fuel to our anger. But as soon as we have that sense of mental unhappiness, like, oh, it didn't go how I want it to, then we get more and more of that until we give rise to anger, to hatred. So we want to fight the person that prevented us from getting what we want, where it can escalate even all the way to killing. And so it's this kind of idea of like this, oh, I didn't get what I want, and that unhappiness, that kind of mental unhappiness that comes from it, that is what feeds into eventually giving rise to full-blown anger. And so when we have too much of a sense of like autonomy, of like, oh, well, I should get what I want, and I shouldn't have to encounter what I don't want. Oh, this person prevented my happiness, and so forth. Those are the kinds of situations where we have that mental unhappiness that then is the fuel that generates anger. So if we are able to then stop that mental unhappiness, and part of this is recognizing that within samsara we are going to encounter good situations, we're going to encounter bad situations, and we're not always going to get what we want. It is samsara. And so we are always going to be subject to situations that might not be pleasant for us or might not be what we had wanted. But if we're able to see it as that, then we're not giving that kind of fuel that would potentially give rise to anger. But as so long as we have this sense, again, as like, oh, I didn't get what I wanted, or I had to encounter what I didn't want, that is going to act as fuel for our anger. And when hatred or anger increases, it destroys us. So we need to focus then, if we don't want to give rise to anger, to getting rid of the cause of it, which is this mental unhappiness.
Cho nên chúng ta ngay từ đầu mình phải loại bỏ sự bất mãn. Mình phải suy nghĩ một cách rất là toàn diện. Tại vì cái thế gian ở chúng ta là cái ở đời mà, ở thế gian, ở trong cõi sinh tử luân hồi, mọi người đều do nghiệp và phiền não. Cho nên mọi thứ sẽ không bao giờ xảy ra như ý của bạn muốn. Nên mỗi người sẽ có một cái quan điểm và cái ý tưởng riêng của họ. Cho nên chúng ta không thể nào xảy ra theo như ý của mình muốn. Cho nên mình cũng không thể đạt được tất cả những cái điều mình muốn. Có rất nhiều điều mình muốn mình không bao giờ có được. Cho nên tại sao mình nuôi dưỡng cái tâm bất an, bất mãn đó làm gì? Cho nên bất mãn là thức ăn ngon nhất cho cái sự giận dữ. Cho nên nó làm thực phẩm để nuôi dưỡng cái giận dữ và tức giận. Nên làm cho cái sức mạnh của giận dữ càng ngày càng lớn mạnh. Nên nếu chúng ta muốn loại bỏ cái giận dữ thì chúng ta phải nên loại bỏ cái sự bất mãn.
Rangdam meeting by Yongre, Rangnamidam meeting by Yongre, Teni Rangan meeting by Lumbatam meeting by Mabuche, any Condusasa Mabu Yongra, Tesuchi, Dimandri, so the Condu, Imedaki Condusagorno, Kachimbre. I should immediately Randa Rangiwa Sidua, Randa Sosa Chor of Chigisera. Oh, any meditation and the vacation. Immediately saying the Shetan did the dungeon. Tanjom said the little Sendile, social cure, Namile cure, Lombole cure, Roy, Condu Savage, Lombole, Mabutonda, Bundal, Calesuda, the country Chigara. I mission there said, Tanda Kabuch and Cosegra. Some Charlie Soso a cigar, Condu said, Shadachi Tandimus and the Tanga, Soso Pa, Shivati Yogara, Condu de Pedusa de Tiora. Namita Soso than scared and cheated. Zambulina go to a Congressama. God didn't get you called Chaviana, and the Kachita should you me. Don't let you back on the map, said Halet and Decora. So put the air some Tauda. Bambra, you someone the bullet some maps, so you put there to your mother. I never got in the stomach to a seminar. I thought it task is no son. Didn't you so ask? Yeah.
So here again, we can give rise to this kind of mental unhappiness or sort of discontent, this kind of feeling of, oh, this didn't go right, with respect to like a sense of us. When we like have a sense of our family or our country, our community, and when some sort of harm is done to our family, our group, our community, or there's some sort of prevention in our getting what we want, or on the other side, those that we don't like, there's a lot of people that we think like over there, oh, we don't like them, and when they get something good or something good happens to them, that's the sort of fuel that gives rise to this mental unhappiness. So basically, there are a vast number of areas or ways in which we can give rise to anger. And this anger, again, is something that is harmful to us. It's harmful to others. Someone can have this like really strong anger, and it can cause them to, say, kill other people or even kill themselves to make a point. It is always harmful. Like we see there are leaders who have this strong anger and they think they're just going to go out and destroy all of their enemies. But you really can't just bomb all of your enemies and somehow live alone. So I'm going a little bit off on the side here. But the thing is that if one is really an angry person and just consumed by anger, that pursuit of destroying one's enemies is endless, and you can't really gain any kind of peace from that. So if we recognize the defect of this kind of discontent or mental unhappiness that is the cause of anger, then this will help us to get rid of that and thereby get rid of the anger that results from it. So here then, the second point under the stopping the cause of anger here is then advising that we make effort at the method for averting anger. And so here we need to then, as it explains in verse 8, eradicate or eliminate the cause of anger. And this is the way in which we are able to get rid of anger. So it says, therefore, I should totally eradicate the fuel of this enemy, for this enemy has no other function than that of causing me harm. So when we talk about an enemy, normally in Buddhist texts, we refer to the real enemy as being our ignorance, our lack of knowledge, and our various afflictions. These are the real things that create harm. And so what harms us and others is, again, our lack of knowledge, as well as our various afflictions, including anger. And so here, if we allow our anger to have fuel, to have food of this this mental unhappiness, this mental sort of discord, discontent, then it will grow and get stronger and stronger. But if we eradicate that cause, then there's no food by which the sort of body of our anger can grow stronger and can increase. And so this sort of discontent that we have acts as a cause that leads into full-blown anger that increases that more and more. And the only function of anger is to create harm. It is that which causes harm to us and to others. It creates harm in this life as well as in future lives, as we've seen described. It creates the sort of conditions where we fight others and we harm them and do all sorts of negative actions. And so there is no other function of anger than to create harm and to harm us. So if we recognize that, if we see, oh, this is the real enemy and we want to get rid of that, then we need to get rid of the cause. So it's that getting rid of that mental discontent that allows us to get rid of our anger, our full-blown anger. Once we have given rise to anger, it's really into that mode of destruction, of causing harm, and it's very difficult to eliminate it. But but when we're at the level of, as it says here, like the sort of fuel of it, if we eradicate the fuel of our enemy of anger, then we are able to eliminate it.
Oh yeah, the contrary to me, so the Geshe and the Samsara, contrary to Kaba, Samsara, Sumba, then dogbe, Tamgola Yeshe, contrary to Yimetewa and Dogurva, then dogbe Thabkhe and Generation Yeshe Doa. Yimetewa came Mirikbatans. Yimetewa the Tambune Kerrimaris, standing Madrid, Yimetewa came Kerrimari, Kenya Umar, Majiva Tapsi with the Songora. Yimetewa came Mirikbata. And it take you sense, Yimetewa came Mirik with Kusen Karis, Kusen and the rest, and Yeshe Doa. What? Contrary dogbe. Tanzania Sobashe, Tanzania Yeshe, Yimetewa came Mirikbata, take you sense. Tatambu Yimetewa came Mirikbata Shegora. Yimetewa came Mirikbanes. Garanzola Yimetewa, the Kichu or Maresa, Tandi Madikarisona, Sembenki Bache, the Kichu or Maresa. Kaduina, Tandi Medichona, Sertova, to hit a link is Sobasic, Tandi Medichona, Sertova, that and they would some time I should want in Gura. Subject Jayana, subject Jayamana, and it is Jayamara, to mention it to Hodova. Chalarajila, so a little all you Yungura. Chalarajilana, Raya Mavajere, Savina, and it does some day Majo Mara. Raya Yuberachin, some day Majo, Raya Yuber Tapsi Chavora. What is Yura? That only my Shingura. Yeah, don't do Karsikosana. Ye met you, I came Mirik by the Shagorata, Tambo. Ye met you, I came Miribadi. Ona ye met you, I cheated Panshinas. Ye met you at the Mavs or Conto Mavs or ye met you at the Cus or the Kim Mavs or Shera. Ye met you at Condis Mavs over the Essigora. Ye met you at cheated Panshinas. Chilla Babia Dagini, Kaya Yeni True Mishas at the rest. Chilla Babia Dagini, Kaya Yeni True Mishas. Oh, Karichon in a Tanzera. Two is a Karichon in a subject, Yunani, subject, Tapsi, or some day, Yomara. So I married Yunani, some day, and a Kodomato, take the Yomara. That is some done, then Yoma Chonra. Subject, manner that. To good subject, man, large church, man, get to which it's also. Some day, Yomara. Yomar was queer and serious or that you may die so to me or Matoki Mara. That could come into the unity, transit was so and donane. You may do much, transit with the soya tapsi cheese. Oh, Jade. Oh, Sumba, then dog by Tabla Yeshe. You may do I came Mirik by the take you said what Tambo, you may do I came Mirik butter. Ona you may do I should repulsion. Chilla Babia Dag and a Kaya Yeni Trumaja. Karichona, do a Karichona, simply she did in yoga mess or a sim took mess or that. Took a message or a Meka check and do me to Kiwatan in Yamba Joseph. Mega Chana, Sosan, the Vatican to a magazine to Gumardo. Chila Babia Dag in the Kawi in the Tum Mijase, Dogger Carachum by Nasoso, Yimedeva Chiati, Yimedeva Chana, Soso, some true manchera. Because I can do Mendoza, some true and the same Mijiba Shavina, Cochibu de Soya Magazine, turned that to a chum de Soya Magazine, turned that to any Kayo Marata, some days I didn't Tunga Dunga was so Tunga said that Mata Pendo Yomara. Tunga Chen Pendo Yogachina, Tunga Chen and Dura, Pendo Kayo Martin, never see Mataji. Nikacha can do me draws around the one do Mare. Kawatan and Yambar use. That make a chain a contract. Tagital Lavanashi, Keva Mabusabe, Kawasashan, Kawatu never short Tangra, shall never see a Condusagura, nearly shall a Pemba Chevis, but to the Savala Sober, Kawasasha Unitin and the Mambusi, Debu came, have a sir Debusin, Debu, Yovatin, Yoru Tankiwara, or Tinder, Sendilla, so never say Sandal, never say Yimi, you say Kawashim Matender. This also Congress and Gora. That's over. Megashia can do me do say, Kewatani Yambar use, Kewa Yam Dure, Kewa Shimanga Solicare, Sentile Miki, Koma, or Keke Yamidua, or Tisozako, Tamadivichuna, Imidua de Karum, Chile Babiata, and said, Carichone, that's some true Messigora. Only at the church here, Tondaya, do Tedova. Something Namjuna Madame says, so some long you said on that. Namjuk has a low hanging knowledge, just trying to make the castle to do so, carry capture Yora, or Tetuka Mav said on that. Simply to do that on the Shusha. Simply to do Dosana Lunga, Charlie to do Yara. Lunga, you would go to us, so the same Gikawa, Katandar, or Operation, the Kolka Semje, Korangi killing a share Yomara. Simply Karakus and any teaching God, or change. Simply I choose you tired and that. Some times said, so to care or no. Another can pay and do that. Really, I thought communism, which I wrote, I should do it, and let us cassette or hakohi. Can you pay or I'm young Tobia of your major jobs at the city. And that was to do our tin, I think I will let you there. Because I am major Jagdo has a major cassette. Teach you then, pay or a pay and the Tobia got a prayer and Nangi Kambo Konjak cheese, say yo Mara. The Chilo lets the cassette, Chilo yon died, Milumbale Sara. Cashet some days is Humadua, touch air mother. Lumboko and chicken, dog ambulu, modest, some dash you do. Cashet person better. Tangachi less and knowledge, Sanachi, 1 years a tire in the casualty. Simply they can order, because somebody gives you a tick door. The cassette is really ordered to you order the Congress charge of Yonkosora, Kaki your mother. You know, simply to touch your mother. Lumboko and chicken, the Toji, so Tonish, Cambuja, or myself, because some Tonjuli Kevadua, to which one daughter than Nigalia, to which one daughter or Rakangalia. In a cassette, some pay some days ago, I do not teach you to talk or Tanga, as Mamma less. I used to that and that is said, what in it is. So the assembly of completion and carry you touch you are, subject Yara. Some delico, Lozon return a carina Yagado, and get you. Tambunashi could durate you are, some be ranging yourselves. Some Koran ranging the country young Maroa. Some Koran ranging the she was says, Tambu Abuja. That's the end which you do, some of the time they come to say, Najaja, Tado, Kanga Yungura. The Koranshi Koran Kondo in any so I gave your Mara. Tasha Jurmario, Koranshi de Reo Mare. Luburgi, assembly, Lubur to Tende Yungurno. This was a subject Yara.
So,
Did
you say?
Oh, yeah. She said, Chile Babian Tag and a Kawaii took me charge, the same cowboys, they had the same, they took my shoes, and I took me with a social. No, because you can do me rules and Megachana, social nobody short house and go short sati. So subject I am and the Vetrake Omar, some day said and the coach, the Vetrake and the some day Shora, some day the Vetrake Omar, Sora. Because you can do me rules, Kawatan and Yambari goose.
This one tradition.
No.
Okay, so here, then here, the actual method for averting anger is divided into two topics. And so the first is that it's not logical or right to give rise to this kind of mental unhappiness. And then the second is this sort of reason for that. And so here, we don't want to allow our kind of discontent to arise, because once our discontent arises, then we give rise to anger. And so again, this sort of will come up in later verses, but when a thing that we don't like arises, if there's something that we can do to fix that kind of situation, then we should fix it. We should correct that somehow. But if we can't sort of make it how we want it or have it how we like, if it's not sort of according with what we want, then we just have to accept that we can't fix it. And there's no benefit to worrying about that. It just creates additional kinds of suffering. Like if we have lost something, if we really have lost it and we can't get it back anyway, it doesn't do any good to worry about that, to sort of ruminate and think again and again. But if there's some way to fix the situation, to remedy it, then we should just make the effort to remedy it rather than worry about it. So in order to get rid of anger, we really have to get rid of the kind of discontent that we experience. And so whatever sort of comes up, we should be able to deal with it. As it says in verse 9, whatever befalls me, I shall not disturb my mental joy. For having been made unhappy, I shall not accomplish what I wish, and my virtues will decline. So here, whatever comes up, if we are able to sort of deal with it mentally, to recognize, oh, this isn't really what I wanted, but that's okay. Instead of say, oh, this isn't what I wanted, and thinking about it again and again, and just ruminating on that problem increases our suffering more and more. So again, it will come later, but if there is a way to fix our problem, then we should make an effort and fix it. But if there really isn't a way to remedy that situation, then worrying doesn't get us anywhere. If we're able to recognize, like, well, this is the nature of samsara. There's no need to get upset over the fact that I'm going to encounter unpleasant situations and so forth. I'm not always going to get what I want, but I'm not going to allow this kind of discontent to disturb my mind. Because when we allow that to disturb our mind, then that's going to create basically discontent for us. We're not going to be, it will destroy our happiness. It will not allow us to accomplish what we wish. And it's going to destroy our sort of virtues in the future. Our virtues will decline. And so the method to avert our anger is really to get rid of its fuel, to stop this discontent before it arises. If we don't allow ourselves to give in to that kind of discontent, then we're not going to engage in harming others. We'll benefit others. But if we get rid of that, if we allow ourselves to give in to discontent, we'll then get angry and we'll get rid. We don't sort of hold to the idea, oh, I don't want to cause harm.